extraordinary privilege to be able to serve with you in the house and get the opportunity to do some good things together. And it's a great opportunity to be here. And I'll certainly talk, but just know if you have any questions, feel free to ask any. This is a great opportunity in this environment to get a chance to talk in detail about things. Often on the trail, you often can't get in so much detail at times, and certainly rallies it's hard to get into details of policy, but that's sort of what I've always been about. I love getting involved in fixing things, and so as a Democrat in the House, which I've served now for 22 years, I've really been able to build solutions and actually get things done. Just this last week, we had a big battle on solar power to try to move us forward. Great example. We want to get rates down, get us back to having more competitive rates in South Carolina. Part of doing that is opening our doors to renewable energy. And I've worked for 15 years to get us to where we are. We added something called Act 236, but it sort of just cracked the door. We thought we wouldn't get to this cap until 2025, but guess what? In 2018, we're here, and if we don't pass this legislation, 3,000 hardworking South Carolinians will lose their job. We'll miss the opportunity to access the sun to power our futures with a lower cost alternative. And so what we're trying to do is direct the utilities to actually give ratepayers a break. But if they can buy energy at a lower rate, they pass that on to the benefit of the consumers and actually have less revenue. My bill was the only bill I think ever that I've seen where the utilities came out in full force against it, and they actually lost the first big vote. We headed into the third reading vote with a solid majority, but they came up with some never seen before in the 30 years of precedent that I've seen where they required a 2/3 vote. And so the bill did ultimately fail to get a 2/3 vote. It always had a majority, but we're going to get it done in the Senate. And the bottom line is this. It's about what I will do as governor to make sure that we carve our own energy future, that we write it ourselves, not based upon what's in the best interest of a particular utility, but what's in the best interest of South Carolinians. And you can certainly look at what happened with the VC Summer Plan and the $9 billion failure that is, and the 5,600 jobs that were lost in a day, and see that, the need for 2 new nuclear plants is not really compelling, right? The lights are on, nobody's saying we gotta go build them now. It was more about their position in the industry than about our needs. I'm gonna list something called the Energy Office. And I'm gonna make it a cabinet level, and we're gonna write our own future and decide what we need and what's best for us. And part of that will include a plan for expansion of renewable energy. And when we get the bill passed, it will be not just saving 3,000 jobs, but we'll be adding thousands of new jobs, and it will be adding billions in new investment across our state. To compare, great example, North Carolina, they do about 5,000 megawatts, just under 5,000. I remember when South Carolina was at 4. We're now at about 300. They do about $1 billion in new investment every year. And what happens with that is it helps drive rates low. I remember when we had some among the lowest rates in the country, and it helped us with our competitiveness and helped us move forward and bring jobs here, bring industry. Now we're among the highest rates within those service areas in the country. And so we're going to change that. And I'm going to do that by bringing in renewable energy and the jobs and the economic opportunities that will bring. But number one, I'd have to say, is no longer being on the bottom of all these lists that we know as South Carolinians we should be on the top of, or on the top of the list that we should be on the bottom of. And certainly education is first of mind for me. I think it's the number one job of the governor. I think it's the most important job of our governor is to be the education governor that we need to move our state forward, because as I said a little bit today, and I know this from my own experiences too, and I look back when we had Dick Riley was governor, and we led the nation in innovation in our schools. We were actually the example for the country about how to fund our schools in a responsible way, to be fair and equitable in that process. And we funded innovative initiatives through the EIA that were making a difference, and our performance was where it needed to be. Well, we're now almost 33 decades almost of failing to make those investments. We shouldn't be surprised where we are. And as governor, I believe it's time we invest in our people and our places again. So I'm going to deliver first. Certainly we've got 4,300 teachers. We stand to lose. Teacher recruitment is an all-time low, and part of improving that is going to be raising their salaries. We're among the lowest starting salaries in the country for teachers. And you look what's happened in Oklahoma and Kentucky and several of the other states that you see this big movement happen in education, and that needs to come here to South Carolina because it is so directly correlated to our ability to have an educated workforce, make sure our kids get out of college not saddled with a great deal of debt, instead with economic opportunities for themselves and their kids. We can have these things. It's about making the right investments. So I'm going to get back to, I remember when Jim Hodges was governor, and another very strong education governor. We invested in something called First Steps to School Readiness. I was very fortunate to be the primary sponsor of that legislation and really worked real hard to get it through. And I actually introduced it the year before Jim Hodges was elected, and it was called Children First, and it went nowhere because it didn't have a champion in the governor's office. And it just shows you the power of that bully pulpit, the power of that office to give a direction, give a compass heading for our state. And we were making those investments. We actually were getting to above the Southeastern average for teacher salaries. We were lowering class sizes. We were improving performance. And we had the first ever early childhood education initiative in the history of our state. And I was very fortunate to be a small part of making that happen. Well, as governor, I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to make sure that all across our state, particularly in rural areas where single parents, families have a tough time providing high quality early care and education for their families and making ends meet. And it's all about making sure we have these opportunities available. And so I've got a plan to expand what we have offered in the First Step, particularly in rural parts of our state, so that we have that high quality early care and education opportunity for our kids. Healthcare is another thing. I can remember, there's some really good things about the institutional knowledge, having been there as long as I have. But some people say too long. Well, what it does is it gives me the ability to know how to get things done and how to build coalitions to pass legislation, not just First Steps and not just some of these solar initiatives. But I remember expanding, 4-year-old kindergarten, 5-year-old kindergarten we didn't have before, and we worked hard to bring people together. I worked closely with Molly Spearman back to create a county grants program to prevent teen pregnancy. It's been a national model on how we actually reduce the rates of teen pregnancy. It's called the South Carolina Campaign, and they do tremendous work. It's made a big difference in families around the state. Healthcare was another thing. I can remember when we were battling over cheap cigarettes. Remember, we had one of the lowest cigarette taxes in the country, and we also knew that it was all about, it's not a big government question or a small government question. It's always, for me, is it a smart government decision? Are we doing the right things, making the right investments? And here was a great point. We had like almost $400 million in cigarette-related costs associated, and we had among the lowest. Well, it was the lowest tax in the country. And what we needed to do is leverage that resource to help provide access to health care, help do some smoking cessation programs to work with teens so they never got started, and help pursue a healthier South Carolina for us. It took 10 years to get it done, but it eventually got done, and we made some good strides. Healthcare now, it's the same story, right? After expansion was passed under the ACA, South Carolina's governors chose not. Your money, your tax dollars, going to other states to fund health care for citizens in those states. Again, when we need it, we have hundreds of thousands who, simply because they live here, don't have access to care. And all it will take as governor will be a stroke of my pen to expand coverage and make sure we have that availability in our great state. And we're going to do it our way, right? We're going to invest in it responsibly. So we're going to make sure that we support measures that support preventative care. We're going to establish medical homes so that people have a relationship with a physician, and we invest in that type of relationship. Other states that have done it have shown tremendous savings, and so that's a direction I certainly plan on taking our state. I tell you, the other day I was fortunate to stand with our youth at the March for Our Lives, and I was very humbled that they asked me to speak in Columbia. I was the only candidate invited to participate, and it meant a great deal to me, and I was very humble. It was an extraordinary privilege to stand with them. And actually, my friend Noah, he gave one of the most impassioned speeches there. Noah, you gave a great speech that day for all the right things. I was very grateful for your words. But I know this, they have a voice. For me as governor, they will be heard. And what they are taking and what they are insisting upon and the ways that I think are very appropriate. You look at history, some of the most important movements, whether it be civil rights or some of the, during the Vietnam era too, some of the awareness that they were working to bring. I can remember a young John Kerry coming back after the war and making his case about what are we making the right decisions. Look, it is our youth in this effort that I believe will continue to help move our state and the nation in the right direction. 1 million voices speaking together as one is not going to be stopped. And I look for, and I can see, lots of opportunities for common sense gun reforms, whether it be universal background checks, whether it be making sure we have, restrict access to military-style weapons on a retail basis, whether we make sure we close the Charleston loophole, or to make sure we close the gun show loophole. These are all, I think, very reasonable steps that most gun owners support. And as somebody who's spent a lot of time around guns when I was as young as I could be, I had a .410 and learned how to hunt, and I've been hunting all my life. I'm a combat veteran in the military. I've been in places where everybody is armed to the teeth, and I promise you don't feel safe. It doesn't work that way. So I think we can, I know we can make some progress. And in the past, when you look at historically what's happened in the State House, it's been mostly about preventing kind of the crazy stuff, like permitless carry or constitutional carry, which means somebody could walk down Myrtle Beach on the beach, carry their AR-15 over their shoulder. And you saw this in Charlottesville when you saw some of the protesters running around with military-style assault weapons. And look, that simply is not who we are. It's not the values we have. Doesn't reflect. And actually, there was a time in our nation's history where everybody was armed, and everybody talks about the Wild West. Well, Dodge City was one of the most restrictive, highly regulated areas because it was about a sense of community. People didn't feel like going out to the restaurants if people were open carrying around everywhere. So it was about building opportunities for economic growth, and the Chamber of Commerce for that area said, look, we want to have a place that is certainly safe and secure, but we also want to build community and economic opportunity. So that's what I think our values reflect, and our laws must reflect that. There's just so many things I could share. Yes, ma'am.
What are your thoughts on bringing gambling, legalizing gambling?
Well, I think this is what I would do with gambling. So we already have what is the charitable bingo initiatives. I would like to see a commission, and as governor, what I would do is investigate that. It's not something that I see as a priority for our state. I'm looking to take care of our schools and our health care and those things first. But I think it's worth investigating. And what I would do is build a commission and a group to sit down and study it. I'd like to get feedback from the people of our state. There's some support for it in certain parts of the state, and it certainly has some economic impact, but it also has its negatives. And I don't think it's something that I, as a candidate for governor, can say definitively I would be for this, because I think it's worth investigating. It deserves investigating. But I can't tell you that I'm for it, because I think there's a big balancing test that needs to be given, and then we need input from the people of our state, so that if we ever did it, we did it the right way. And so I can't tell you that I'm for it right now. Yeah.
Okay. One other question, if I could. One more. On the education thing, when I was out in Dillon at the Democratic Convention, found out that the school board members there are appointed. Like there's one person somewhere in Dillon that appoints them. And here in Horry County, I remember all the hype about, oh my goodness, now the school board people are going to get paid. So, I'm aware that some of our educational structure has these local groups that have a lot of power and autonomy and are making decisions. And I appreciate all the initiatives that you're suggesting, but, just how much, pressure can, if you became governor,
Yeah.
to get some uniformity with, and I'm not so much about standards, I homeschooled my,
Sure.
child and supported homeschooling families.
Absolutely.
But I'm not with Betsy DeVos and taking all this money away from the public schools.
Yeah, right.
I just think there's some major reform. I mean, I like
Right.
initiatives,
Yeah.
but have you thought about major reform to our system of public education?
I have, and there are a couple things that I would suggest, particularly when it comes to school boards, and the numbers of districts that we have, how they're organized. You'll have some districts that have very, very few students in them, and you'll also have some counties that have 7 districts and some counties that have 1 district. And I think the best way to deal with this is there are some measures that the Education Oversight Commission has established for what is an optimum size for a school district. And what I'd like to see is, much like the BRAC style, when the federal government looks at closing a base like Myrtle Beach, the Air Force Base, when that was closed, you didn't leave that up to the delegation or the members of the congressional delegation, because it would never happen, because it was like the third rail of politics, was to vote to close a base in your own district, right, in your own state. What they did was create a commission that sort of objectively looked at all these things, came up with some recommendations based upon reasonable, rational criteria, and then the Congress, and in this case the General Assembly, would vote up or down on a decision like that. And I think what you'll find too is this: one, I think there are definitely some that need improvement, others that are doing very well, and that just heightens what is a very inequitable system of our funding of our schools. This is something too that I have a plan that we've written, and we can get to funding equity over a period of time. It's like turning a battleship. It's not going to happen overnight. But even if we went through and had optimized every school district around the state, it's not going to generate the kind of windfall of revenues that people think would just fix everything. I do think the priority needs to be money in the classroom, and leveraging every bit of resource on the front lines to support our kids and support teachers. And there's a whole host of things that you talk about, initiatives. You can look at what's happening in Colleton High and Scotch Branch. They are making tremendous strides, actually making significant improvement through something called the New Tech Method. It's an interdisciplinary project-based teaching initiative that encompasses a variety of subjects, and they're making tremendous progress. So I think certainly we need more money in the classroom, we need more for our teachers, but we also need to support innovation. We need to support leadership, strong leadership, give teachers the opportunity to use their initiative, and we also need to look at streamlining the bureaucracy in ways that also support our students and teachers. So there's a lot to be done, and eventually I think with this sort of reprogramming of the way we fund schools, we can get to funding equity. It won't happen overnight. If you did that, there would be too many winners and losers, and you have to do it over a long period of time. It took us a long time to get where we are now. And so, but those are some of the things. You're right, and it's gonna take a strong partnership, with me as governor and our superintendent of education, who I know very well and served with. And we will work, I think, very well together to focus on the priorities. And, it is so much about leadership and focus and value. We just haven't had an education governor in a long time. And it really is not, it's an economic issue. We have thousands of available jobs today, but we don't have the workforce educated to meet those jobs. We've done a great job recruiting. There's many reasons why you would want to build a business here and grow it here, but one thing that's held us up is making sure we have the educated workforce to do this. And I think key to that is investing in our schools again. Early childhood, K through 12, our tech schools and higher ed. And it's an alignment of this process, so that we push down things like coding opportunities for our kids. They get an earlier opportunity to get a handle on things that are jobs that are available now. And we're sort of, setting them up for success. It's really kind of for me, it's a military thing. I mean, it's this kind of leadership, servant leadership that I've learned about in my service is the commitment that you have to those that you serve, to give them everything they need for success. And it's without regard to your own. I have a saying, I've said it many times in the house, you gotta care more about doing the job than keeping the job. And that's how I've served for 22 years. always been about the people of our state. And you certainly see examples where politicians not making the decisions for themselves or their own futures. I will not fail that test. I will choose the people of our state always. Yes, ma'am.
A few days ago, I read that the candidates were asked to release their tax returns.
Yeah.
And the other two did, and did you do that yet?
I did do that, yeah. So I instead of giving them to one reporter,
Okay.
I said I would make them available to all. I did the exact same way that Vincent Shaheen did it. And so we sent out a press release before that story. And if you read the story, it said that I was releasing my tax returns and making them available. I just had one of my opponents who refused to acknowledge and has actually lied about it. But yeah, before the story came out, I said they're gonna be available, and you just call up, you set an appointment, you can talk to my CPA, you can look at it all. We got, so yes, it has been offered, and I'm sure there'll be a story at some point, but I've got no problem with that.
Thank you.
Speaking of a topic with pros and cons, medical marijuana,
Yeah,
I imagine it's gonna come around, so what is your position?
I'm for it. Actually, I co-sponsored the bill, Compassionate SC. I believe in it for a number of reasons. One is a combat veteran. I know it's made a difference to me and my colleagues, my comrades who are suffering from PTSD, and it's really enabled them to, particularly those that are 100% disabled, to function again. I know it makes a big difference for those suffering from seizure disorders, and I think it's a wonderful alternative to get moved away from opioids. I think it's an alternative there. We've got some great research being done at USC about it. So I'm 100% for it, have been, and co-sponsor the bill. And, I think we'll have a chance to make some strides on getting it passed with me as governor. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask you about some legislation that you've co-sponsored to establish an independent redistricting commission.
Yes.
Two questions. What are the chances of it passing? And secondly, what can a group like ours do to help get it passed?
Yeah. So great question about an independent redistricting commission. I'll tell you, this is probably in the top 3 of most significant issues facing South Carolina. And the best way to get this done, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in a campaign, but it's for me to be in the governor's office. Because what will happen, we're gonna have a census in 2020. We're gonna go write new plans, and the General Assembly has made and particularly the Republican majority there, has turned it into a fine art form of drawing districts in ways that support their hold of the state, and they will make sure that they continue to gerrymander our state. So bottom line is, I will be there to veto any plan that continues to gerrymander South Carolina, which will be the case. I'll veto that plan. I'm the only candidate running for this office that will be there to do that. And when that happens, it'll be then moved to, there'll be an impasse declared. Lawsuit will be brought. 3-judge panel will write the district, write the state rather. And they'll follow communities of interest, the kinds of things that will write a more contiguous state and better districts. And then at that point, once we have an impasse in place, we'll go through a cycle of an election, and then I believe have an opportunity to actually pass it. There's growing support for it. There are more Republicans for it actually now than there have ever been. We're close to having the critical, amount of support to get it done, but we're not there yet. And I think creating this impasse is going to be the thing that will drive through a legislative solution. And look, I think you got to look at the impact here. Really, up until this cycle, most races were uncontested at the general election. There's no choice, just one
80%.
person, 80%, vast majority. And the reason is because the actual election happened in the primary. Well, who wins the primary? But the most partisan one, who's typically is able to pursue the 12, 13% of their district that got them elected. And so most of the middle of our state, of 60+% of the voters, show up in November thinking they're going to choose their leaders, and it's already happened. And then what happens when you get in a room and try to build consensus to move the state forward? There's nothing there to encourage agreement, because you hold your continued service to a very small portion of your district. And it creates a situation where people have to get to know people that all like them, or serve people that aren't like that. And so this is so important, because it impacts every issue. Every issue in the General Assembly is impacted by how gerrymandered our state is. And we've got to get that fixed, because we'll find more opportunity to focus on, the big issues and make the tough decisions if, we're having races in a general election again. And people have to make the case there. It's so important. But I first veto the plan, court-drawn plan by a 3-judge panel with the impasse pushed through a legislative solution, which I'm gonna need everybody's help in this room to help educate voters about how important this is. And then we hopefully have a place where we're actually getting districts that are written by folks that aren't serving them. Because I can remember when 170 members cared about it, but you couldn't find anybody else that cared about it.
Have you signed our petition yet?
No, happy to check it out. Is it a redistricting petition?
I'll bring it to you.
Okay. I'm sure I'd be delighted to. Yes, ma'am.
What about HOA regulations, because current condo owners have no meetings or votes?
Those are actually, I've done some work on it. I believe maybe Representative Myrtle has done some work on that too. There is some, we were trying to set a way where they couldn't vote their inventory. In other words, they could only vote, it depended upon where in the process, where they could, and this maybe is just something I don't know all the details on, but, obviously I think an issue down here, but I'm not sure. Tell me the question again.
I don't know my mother if I'm gonna ask the
Okay,
question.
well, I can tell you this, I mean, it's, you hear, I've been involved in a lot of litigation with homeowners association, and there are some problems where individual owners at certain times of the development don't
One
have
of the
the.
things I do know is that in the place that she's living is that, and a lot of the places that are building up, is that the owners, whenever there's a problem, the people that own the places don't have a voice.
Right.
They talk amongst themselves, and these are like, we're talking like real severe problems, and they talk amongst, but when they go to get the owners, it's like it's like something ridiculous, like where the owner has, he passes on the ability to, I might be wrong, but it's something like this, where the owner passes on the ability for somebody to manage for something, a ridiculous amount, like 80 years or something like this,
Right.
and then the owner takes off somewhere, so then the person has to deal with the manager, and then he's not reachable, and he keeps saying, yeah, we're gonna have a meeting, organize yourselves, no, we'll have a meeting, it never happens. And they're supposed to, according to their lease, they're supposed to have one, like, I think it's like 4 times a year or something.
Right, sure.
They don't.
Yeah.
So things really never get addressed, and like, so things are falling apart, emergency vehicles. And the big one is that emergency vehicles can't get into gated communities.
Right.
That's a big one. By their sirens, it's supposed to activate the gate. It's not activating the gate. I know this one for a fact that happens in my mother's community, that they can't get in. So
Well,
somebody could die of a heart attack.
Right, and I think what you're describing, and I've seen this in cases, is where because typically once the development's completed, everybody who is an owner has a vote. They then move the management over to the homeowners association, in which they're supposed to establish a board and have elections, and there's you both have the statute that directs us, and there's also usually a master deed that also provides a lot of the governance of that process. And what happens is, and what I believe you're describing, is where one person might, in a condominium, own like 20 of the units, but then just lease them out to people who are paying a lease, but then has the power to vote out everybody because they can vote each one of their units. And there have been some pretty unjust situations that have come out of that. And I know this is something that's come up regularly to try to deal with legislation to balance those interests. And